Okay, welcome to the first video in the Next Level series. Before we get started, I want to make sure that anybody that is coming into this, watching this video, that has not already memorized major and minor chords of every key, that is going to be pivotal in coming into this phase. So even though this is kind of working on elementary principles of music, this is technically the Next Step series. So with it being Next Step series, there has to be a first step. So in that first step, what you would need to do is take every single key. So you've got the key of C, C sharp or D flat, D, D sharp or E flat, E, F, F sharp or G flat, G, G sharp or A flat, A sharp or B flat, B, and then you're back to the key of C again. You need to make sure that you know every single major chord and minor chord of each key. Each chord, I should say. So, assuming that everybody that's coming into this already is aware of that, we can go ahead and get started. Now, in order to kind of take things to the next step, we have to assume that someone who's coming into this is used to only playing basic chords. So, if you are playing a song like Jesus Loves Me, and let's take the key of C since there's no accidentals or black keys in this. So, Jesus Loves Me, someone that might benefit from this and learning every single thing that we have to say going forward is probably playing the song a little bit like this. Jesus loves me, this I know, for the Bible tells me so. Very basic. One chord per change. Little ones to him belong, they are weak, but he is strong. So what our goal is to get you to kind of play this in a way that is a little more freestyle. Jesus loves me, this I know, for the Bible tells me so. Little ones to him belong, they are weak, but he is strong. So that's just an example of where we're trying to take you with this. And the first thing that I want to talk about in moving on with this next step is the importance of learning your scales. Everyone hates to hear that. I don't like going through scales, but it's such a good practice because whether you're wanting to freestyle, and freestyle is basically if you're looking at a chord sheet of music, if you had Jesus Loves Me in front of you and the chords were C, F, C, G, freestyling would be able to kind of create what's called passing tones. Jesus loves me, this I know, for the Bible tells me so. You're hitting the major chords of C and F, but where the melody is coming in, you're using kind of altered chord progressions to get there. There's also floating melodies or counter melodies that you can play with that. And it just adds extra flavor to what you're trying to do. So in order to know where you're going with that, you have to know what your scales are. Now in the key of C, it's pretty easy. You just hit the white notes. So anything as far as a floating melody would go, that could be played over someone singing. Jesus loves me, this I know, for the Bible tells me so. Floating melodies. So if you think of it as just going through your scales, it will open up this whole world of a keyboard for you. And anything in the keys is working really just in a 12-note variation where you have only 12 notes between one C and another C. So I've played C, here's 1, C, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And then 13 would be your 1 again. So anything that you do in here is just going to repeat. So if you go through your scales, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. That's all your C major scale is. But you want to do this with every single key signature. So you want to take the key of D. If you're playing in the key of D, go through your D major scale. And you want to be able to play that major scale. In the key of E, do the same thing. And if you do this, then you can map it out as you're playing. So if you're playing, a lot of times at our church, at Life Church in Fishers, we try to group as much of the set in the same key as possible. It helps for flow of transition of songs. So if you're playing in the key of E the whole set, whoa, there we go. If you're playing in the key of E the whole set, then the whole time, all you have to do is just know what your scales are for the key of E. And you don't have to guess a lot, but if you're doing a set where you're playing the first song in the key of E, and then the next song is going to be in the key of G, you need to know kind of what you're working with. So go through each and every key signature and go through your scales. I would recommend going up and down. Go up once, and then down once. And do that with each one. Even the ones like F sharp, we don't use that a lot. It's not something that's very common. Move this down because I think I'm bumping the camera there. We don't play a lot. A lot of worship sets don't like the keys of F sharp or A flat. You know, D flat or E flat. Those are not common keys that we play in, but you want to know what those scales are just in case you run across a chord that's gonna be used with that. So that's the very first step in opening up this world. I wish it wasn't some boring homework for you, but that is going to be the best exercise. If you're sitting down on a Saturday and you've got a couple hours to devote to this, I would say start out by going through all of your scales and memorize those. Work on memorizing those, okay? As far as minor scales, I don't necessarily go through the process of memorizing the minor scales. I kind of already have them memorized for the most part, not as much as the major scales, because most times we don't play a lot of dirges in church or minor songs. Now, if you did, it would help you out to know that minor scale. So if a major scale in C, a minor scale, so those would be the notes in a C minor chord if you wanted to kind of solo over those. Same thing for an F, which I just transitioned to. You want to know what your notes are to kind of counter melody and solo in there. So once you've gone through that, I'm going to assume that you're going to go ahead and do this homework and go through learning those scales. Then what you want to do is start looking at inversions. Now, an inversion is just where you're, or how you're structuring a chord. So if you're playing the key of C, and you're playing a song in the key of C, most people that are playing basic chords are going to start with a C, and they're going to start with a C and go to an E and go to a G and make a triad off of that. And then if it calls for going to the next chord, which is, let's say, G, then you would, in most cases, start on the note of G, play a B and play a D, So your chord transition would sound like this. And if you went to F, same thing. And what this is called is a root chord, meaning that the very first note of how you're stacking that chord is on the root of that chord, C. In the key of C, the very first one that you're playing is C, the note of C. If you're going to a G, you're stacking that chord with G on the bottom, B, and then D. What an inversion is taking all the notes of that chord. Let's take C, for example. C, E, G, and then the next triad chord is a C again. C, E, G. It's an octave higher, but if you keep playing this, or even starting lower, all I'm playing is C, E, G, C, E, G, C, E, G, C, E, G, C, E, G. So those are all of the notes that make up your key of, or your chord of C. So what an inversion is it's taking all the C note structures and finding a different spot to play them. So instead of stacking the key, the chord of C with C, E, G, and then a first inversion, which is the next step from the root, is going to start with the E on the bottom, E, G, C. So root, first inversion, second inversion, you're basically starting with what would have been the third note, and that's now going to be on the bottom, G, C, E. Now where this comes into play to your benefit is if you're changing from something like a C to a G. If you play, for instance, a G starting with the third inversion, or a C chord starting with the third inversion, which is with the G on the bottom, if you're going to the chord of G as the next chord, well, one finger's already hitting that. So you're playing a C like this, and then you're going to your G, and you can drop these two fingers down. And then if you're going to an F, you're shifting everything down, and your G and your C and your F are all played in this box here, which sounds a lot more uniform and related than and that's an example of showing root chords as opposed to inverted chords that are making a crunch chord progression, crunched together. Okay? So if you go through, as your next step, you've gone through your scales, and you kind of learn those and memorize those, well then go to your inversions. So let's go to the key of G. If this is your root, C, B, D, then your first inversion, you're going to get rid of the G on the bottom, and now you're going to play it on the top. So you start with your second note on the bottom, B, D, G. Second inversion would be D, G, B. So if you play all of them in sequence, root, first inversion, second inversion. In doing that in every single key signature, that will help you, again, to map out where you can get your chords from. Okay? So you don't always have to stick to this when you're playing songs. It just is kind of a good principle if you're trying to have something that's less harsh on the ears. If I were to play a C up here, and a G down here, and an F down here, sonically my ears and my musical mind is just all over the map. And you might want that effect sometimes, but it's pretty rare unless you're working dynamics in a song. So especially if the keyboard is soloed in a song and you're kicking off the song, let's take for example tremble. So starts with, if we're in the key of C, starts on an A minor, goes to an F, and then a C, and then a G. So instead of playing the roots, if I want this to kind of sound more uniform and together, like they're related and they're trying to communicate with each other, the chords, I'll play my A down here, peace, bring it all to peace. And I'm playing my inversions all together. And it sounds a lot more uniform than if you're playing. See how there's a lot broader tone spectrum there? So getting into inversions will help you make a lot better sense of where you're playing chords together in a song. So that's how you use inversions to your advantage. Now, there's one other thing that I want to kind of show you with this. Octaves. If you are in a band, I've been in this quite a bit, especially lately, where we've got some people that are out on the worship team and they kind of got different things going on in their lives, and we've made some changes in the service times, and so we're working on some Sundays on a bit of a skeleton crew. And if you're with people that maybe are not as confident in being a lead instrument or having lead lines in what they're playing, then someone has to step up to the plate. And guess what? The piano is a lead instrument. So if you are on keys and there's no one else on a rhythm instrument, it's just bass and drums and you, well, you're going to be covering a lot of those lead parts. And you don't have to, but it'll definitely sound pretty empty if you're not trying to cover some of that. And the way that you would do that is with learning your scales and learning your inversions, of course, but also to make something stand out is using octaves. And an octave is basically you're playing a C here, and the next C that you find on the keyboard or down, that's an octave. And if you play those both at once, you get kind of a power note. And a good example of this is in the song The Lion and the Lamb by Leland. And we play this quite a bit. All right. So you're taking that lead line, and by hitting it in octaves, you're able to kind of enforce that and bring that out. But again, knowing what notes to play is going to come with partly learning your scales and learning what notes are going to be made up in each chord in that key signature that you're in. So that's kind of the first take on this first video, and we are going to dive into a lot more of this and make a lot more sense of this in future videos. So just as a recap of what we've talked about, hopefully anyone that's coming into this already knows how to play in every key, every chord, major and minor. And if they don't, that's going to be the first step of homework, is play every single chord, major and minor. If I were to say play a B major chord, go to a B major chord. B minor chord, an F major chord, F minor chord, F sharp major chord, F sharp minor chord. So to be able to just go to that without thinking, that's the very first step if you haven't done that yet coming into this video. The second, know your scales. Start with C and just work your way up and down and go to every single one. Go to C sharp, go to D, go to E flat, go to E, and just do the scale up and do the scale down. And start to memorize that, which will help you map out the keyboard in front of you, so that you're not doing a guessing game, or you're not a deer in your headlights whenever you're going to a chord and you want to play a melody, or you want to play something that's off of the basic chord and you don't know what to do. The third thing is work on inversions, which really helps you either expand the keyboard or keep it together. And I mentioned briefly about crunch chords, and crunch chords would be everything played in a compact space. Now you can also use inversions if you wanted to add some power down on the low end, and you wanted to play up top, add a little bit of high, which is good for a dynamic difference here. And you can play using the whole keyboard if you want, if you know what your inversions are, because your inversions are just different ways to structure the chords. And then after that, understanding octaves. And octaves really are going to help with muscle memory. When I play bass a lot on keys, 9 times out of 10, all I'm doing is an octave. And everything else is kind of filler with my right hand. And keep in mind, piano is a percussion instrument. It is a hybrid, so a lot of people don't think of it like that, but the definition of a percussion instrument is an instrument that requires hitting it in order to make the desired note or sound come out of it. So just like a marimba would be considered percussion, or a xylophone, you're hitting notes, but you're striking them. This is a striking instrument. You can play percussive type sounds on it. So keep in mind that a lot of stuff is added with rhythm in piano. But back to the octave part of it, I play a lot on my left hand with just doing an octave, and I've gotten to the point that I'm not even looking at the keyboard right now, but I'm just making what I feel is an octave shape on my right hand, and my muscle knows what the stretch of an octave is, just like on my left. I'm not looking at the keyboard at all, and my hands pretty much know what that octave feels like. So you can use that to your advantage, where if you just kind of rest your hands on the keyboard, you can play what an octave will be just by the muscle memory. And those are used a lot in melody playing. And when we get to later videos of how to break down songs, how to break down your part in songs, and different other topics in later videos, we'll dive into that a lot more. So major and minor chords, make sure you know how to play them. Practice and memorize all scales and all keys. Memorize the different inversions. And if you're only playing a chord made up of 3 notes, there's only 3 different inversions you can play: a root, first inversion, and a second inversion. If you were to play like a 7 chord, a major 7 chord, well, now you're running into 4 different ways you can play it, because there's only so many inversions with however many notes you have in that chord. But all you really need to know are just the 3 main inversions: root, first, and second. And then practice your octaves and practice how that feels, and create a muscle memory with that. And we'll see you in the next video.